CHAPTER V. Of Allan and the Holy Flower. This recording is in the public domain. Allan and the Holy Flower by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter V. Hassan. I suppose it must have been 2 hours after dawn on the following morning that I was awakened by knocks upon the door and the voice of Jack saying that Sam the cook wanted to speak to me. Wondering what he could be doing there, as I understood he was sleeping on the ship, I called out that he was to come in. Now this Sam, I should say, hailed from the Cape and was a person of mixed blood. The original stock, I imagine, was Malay, which had been crossed with Indian coolie. Also, somewhere or other, there was a dash of white, and possibly, but of this I am not sure, a little Hottentot. The result was a person of few vices and many virtues. Sammy, I may say at once, was perhaps the biggest coward I ever met. He could not help it, it was congenital, though curiously enough this cowardice of his never prevented him from rushing into fresh danger. Thus he knew that the expedition on which I was engaged would be most hazardous. Remembering his weakness, I explained this to him very clearly. Yet that knowledge did not deter him from imploring that he must be allowed to accompany me. Perhaps this was because there was some mutual attachment between us, as in the case of Hans. Once, a good many years before, I had rescued Sammy from a somewhat serious scrape by declining to give evidence against him. I need not enter into the details, but a certain sum of money over which he had control had disappeared. I will merely say, therefore, that at the time he was engaged to a coloured lady of very expensive tastes, whom in the end he never married. After this, as it chanced, he nursed me through an illness, hence the attachment of which I have spoken. Sammy was the son of a native Christian preacher, and brought up upon what he called the Word. He had received an excellent education for a person of his class, and in addition to many native dialects with which a varied career had made him acquainted, spoke English perfectly, though in the most bombastic style. Never would he use a short word if a long one came to his hand, or rather to his tongue. For several years of his life he was, I believe, a teacher in a school at Cape Town, where coloured persons receiving their education, his department, as he called it, being English language and literature. Wearying of or being dismissed from his employment for some reason that he never specified, he had drifted up the coast to Zanzibar, where he turned his linguistic abilities to the study of Arabic, and became the manager, or head cook, of an hotel. After a few years he lost this billet, I know not how or why, and appeared at Durban in what he called a reversed position. Here it was that we met again, just before my expedition to Pongo-land. In manners he was most polite, in disposition most religious. I believe he was a Baptist by faith, and in appearance a small, brown dandy of a man of uncertain age. He wore his hair parted in the middle and, whatever the circumstances, was always tidy in his garments. I took him on because he was in great distress, an excellent cook, the best of nurses, and above all for the reason that, as I have said, we were in a way attached to each other. Also he always amused me intensely, which goes for something on a long journey of the sort that I contemplated. Such, in brief, was Sammy. As he entered the room I saw that his clothes were very wet, and asked him at once if it were raining, or whether he had got drunk and been sleeping in the damp grass. "No, Mr. Quatermain," he answered, "the morning is extremely fine, and like the poor Hottentot Hans, I have abjured the use of intoxicants. Though we differ on much else, in this matter we agree." "Then what the deuce is up?" I interrupted, to cut short his flow of fine language. "Sir, there is trouble on the ship." Remembering Mavovo, I started at these words. "Where I passed the night in the company of Mr. Somers at his special request." It was the other way about, really. "This morning before dawn, when he thought that everybody was asleep, the Portuguese captain and some of his Arabs began to weigh the anchor quite quietly, also to hoist the sails. But Mr. Somers and I, being very much awake, came out of the cabin, and he sat upon the captain with a revolver in his hand, saying, well, sir, I will not repeat what he said." "No, don't. What happened then?" "Then, sir, there followed much noise and confusion. The Portuguese and the Arabs threatened Mr. Somers, but he, sir, continued to sit upon the capstan with the stern courage of a rock in a rushing stream, and remarked that he would see them all somewhere before they touched it. After this, sir, I do not know what occurred.
since while I watched from the bulwarks someone knocked me head over heels into the sea, and being fortunately a good swimmer, I gained the shore and hurried here to advise you."
"And did you advise anyone else, you idiot?" I asked.
"Yes, sir. As I sped along I communicated to an officer of the port that there was a devil of a mess upon the Maria which he would do well to investigate."
By this time I was in my shirt and trousers and shouting to Mavovo and the others. Soon they arrived, for as the costume of Mavovo and his company consisted only of a moocha and a blanket, it did not take them long to dress. "Mavovo," I began, "there is trouble on the ship."
"Oh, Baba," he interrupted with something resembling a grin, "it is very strange, but last night I dreamt that I told you—" "Curse your dreams," I said. "Gather the men and go down. No, that won't work. There would be murder done. Either it's all over now or it is all right. Get the hunters ready. I come with them. The luggage can be fetched afterwards." Within less than an hour we were at that wharf off which the Maria lay in what one day will be the splendid port of Durban, though in those times its shipping arrangements were extremely primitive. A strange looking band we must have been. I, who was completely dressed, I trust tidy, marched ahead. Next came Hans in the filthy wide awake hat which he usually wore and greasy corduroys, and after him the oleaginous Sammy arrayed in European reach me downs, a billycock and a bright blue tie striped with red, garments that would have looked very smart had it not been for his recent immersion. After him followed the fierce looking Mavovo and his squad of hunters, all of whom wore the ring or isikoko as the Zulus call it, that is, a circle of polished black wax sewn into their short hair. They were a grim set of fellows, but as according to a recent law it was not allowable for them to appear armed in the town, their guns had already been shipped, while their broad stabbing spears were rolled up in their sleeping mats, the blades wrapped round with dried grass. Each of them, however, bore in his hand a large knob kerrie of red wood, and they marched 4 by 4 in martial fashion. It is true that when we embarked on the big boat to go to the ship, much of their warlike ardour evaporated, since these men, who feared nothing on land, were terribly afraid of that unfamiliar element, the water. We reached the Maria, an unimposing kind of tub, and climbed aboard. On looking aft, the first thing I saw was Stephen seated on the capstan, with a pistol in his hand, as Sammy had said. Near by, leaning on the bulwark, was the villainous-looking Portuguese Delgado, apparently in the worst of tempers, and surrounded by a number of equally villainous-looking Arab sailors clad in dirty white. In front was the captain of the port, a well-known and esteemed gentleman of the name of Cato, like myself a small man who had gone through many adventures. Accompanied by some attendants, he was seated on the after skylight smoking, and his eyes fixed upon Stephen and the Portuguese. "Glad to see you, Quatermain," he said. "There's some row on here, but I've only just arrived and don't understand Portuguese, and the gentleman on the capstan won't leave it to explain." "What's up, Stephen?" I asked, after shaking Mr. Cato by the hand. "What's up?" replied Somers. "This man," and he pointed to Delgado, "wanted to sneak out to sea with all our goods, that's all, to say nothing of me and Sammy, whom no doubt he'd have chucked overboard as soon as he was out of sight of land. However, Sammy, who knows Portuguese, overheard his little plans, and as you see, I objected. Well, Delgado was asked for his version of the affair, and, as I expected, explained that he only intended to get a little nearer to the bar and there wait till we arrive. Of course he lied and knew that we were aware of the fact, and that his intention had been to slip out to sea with all our valuable property, which he would sell after having murdered or marooned Stephen and the poor cook. But as nothing could be proved, and we were now in strong enough force to look after ourselves and our belongings, I did not see the use of pursuing the argument, so I accepted the explanation with a smile, and asked everybody to join in a morning nip. Afterwards Stephen told me that while I was engaged with Mavovo on the previous night, a message had reached him from Sammy, who was on board the ship in charge of our belongings, saying that he would be glad of some company. Knowing the cook's nervous nature, fortunately enough he made up his mind at once to go and sleep upon the Maria. In the morning trouble arose as Sammy had told me. What he did not tell me was that he was not knocked overboard, as he said, but took to the water of his own accord, when complications with Delgado appeared imminent. "I understand the position," I said, "and all's well that ends well, but it's lucky you thought of coming on board to sleep." After this everything went right. I sent some of the men back in charge of Stephen for our remaining effects, which they brought safely aboard, and in the evening we sailed. Our voyage up to Kilwa was beautiful, a gentle breeze driving us forward over a sea so calm that not even Hans, who I think was one of the worst sailors in the world,
or the Zulu hunters were really sick, though as Sammy put it they "declined their food." I think I was on the 5th night of our voyage, or it may have been the